Overthinking is inevitable when we are unable to find a break from our own thoughts. The solution then is rather simple: to take a break, whether it be taking a walk, making yourself a cup of tea, or simply taking a moment to look outside the window. To explain why this is the simplest, yet simultaneously the hardest thing to do, we'll explore the classic tale of Archimedes, and at the end of the video I'll reveal how this applies to cognitive stacking, which eliminates the need to chronically think entirely. Born in 287 BC in Sicily, Archimedes was a Greek mathematician and inventor, and he was famously summoned by King Hiram II to measure the weight of his crown, as the king suspected that the goldsmith who had been entrusted with creating the crown had kept some of the gold for himself and replaced it with silver. Without being able to alter the crown in any way, Archimedes became overwhelmingly frustrated. He stopped eating, he stopped sleeping, and he would spend reckless hours obsessed with mathematical formulas to find a solution, and this was all he could think about. Eventually, his students became concerned about him and dragged him to a public bath for him to take a break. As Archimedes descended into the water level in the bathtub began to rise, and this is where he famously discovered that the displacement of water is directly related to the density of the object. Gold is more dense than silver, so theoretically it would displace more water. Mind blown by this discovery, he leapt out of the bathtub and ran naked all the way to the king, screaming "Eureka!", which in Greek means "I've found it." The same thing happened with Sir Isaac Newton when he was sitting under an apple tree, as he later recalls to a historian. After dinner, the weather being warm, we went to the garden and drank tea under the shade of some apple trees. At that moment, the notion of gravitation came into my mind. It was occasioned by the fall of an apple as I sat in a contemplative mood. Why should the apple descend perpendicular to the ground? Thought I to myself. In both these occasions, we can marvel at the genius, yet fail to see where it has come from. It is another case of a finger pointing to the moon. If we concentrate on the finger or glorify the person, we might miss what it is pointing towards. It is not excessive thinking that leads to solutions, but actually taking your mind off the problem. This is perhaps why some of your best ideas come to you when you least expect it, like when in the shower. Can you relate? Can you share with me a recent shower thought that you've had in the comments below? Consider, does your line of work require mental heavy lifting? Are you living your life in a state of worry, constantly catastrophizing about doom and gloom? Are you creating situations in your head about an ex-partner of what should or should not have happened long after the relationship has come to pass? Are you trying to think your way out of overthinking? Regardless of what you might think, overthinking is leading you headfirst into a brain fog. Typically, brain fog results in the lack of clarity, the inability to focus, and poor working memory. And to be clear, working memory is not your ability to recall your autobiographical past, but your ability to retain information in your memory in real time. So, for example, if I gave you 3 names to remember, like Tom, Jack, and Harry, you'll be able to recall this to me. However, if I gave you their phone numbers, your working memory will overload, and it's unlikely that you'll remember all 3. So one thing is clear: overthinking compromises our ability to think clearly. On this Build Your Brain series, we go beyond the typical grit and grind of hustle culture, which often results in burnout. And overthinking is extremely inefficient, and thinking harder is definitely not the answer. On this series, it's not about showing you temporary relief from your own thoughts, but to simply pause and ask, what are you building on the long run for lasting well-being and longevity? A common handicap of great thinkers is that they're often headlocked and disembodied, as if they've been decapitated from their own bodies, and their intelligence is now seeking refuge in their own heads. and the body is not considered to play a part in the intelligence at all. It's not surprising that we've survived successfully over the last 200 million years, yet now as the most advanced species we're now crumbling under the weight of our own success. What is widely misunderstood is that it is not thought, but the state from which our thoughts come from that matters. Is not intelligence, but the combination of sensitivity, honesty, and vulnerability that allows us to come up with solutions that go far beyond what any amount of power or popularity ever can. And this level of brain-body integration is achieved when we are momentarily thought-free. Yet this state is so unfamiliar that I often get asked, what exercises should I do, how often should I do it, and what will these exercises help me achieve? And this is like asking me, how often should I think? You'd actually be shocked to learn what lies on the other side of thought. When it becomes impossible to take a break, we often turn to a practice, but it's not about the practice itself, such as the ice bath or the meditation, long distance running, Pilates, or even the expensive wellness retreat, but it is about the simple act of taking your mind off the problem. And in fact, to teach how not to think is an oxymoron in itself. So for this reason, in my Train Your Nervous System online course, I often teach non-cognitive ways of learning, one of which is called cognitive stacking, where you use a secondary task to teach a primary task. The exercise itself is trivial because what we are teaching is the state from which it comes from. And this allows us to achieve a level of brain-body integration that is required for us to be able to think viscerally. Let us now consider the example of Archimedes and Newton once again in the context of cognitive stacking. In the case of Archimedes, the primary task was to measure the weight of gold in the crown. The secondary task was to take a bath. And by performing the secondary task, his mind was able to take a break from the problem, and his mind was able to figure out a solution on its own accord. In the case of Newton, the primary task was to contemplate the notion of gravity, and the secondary task was to seek shade under some apple trees. The mind operates differently when we simply step aside, and this reinforces the fact that it's not what we think, but the state from which it comes from that matters the most. So a word of caution that cognitive stacking is not about multitasking or burying your head into a device to take your mind off the problem. Social media platforms are designed to trap your attention and exhaust your working memory, and this is one of the leading causes of brain fog, the mind-numbing activity that removes people's ability to deal with their own thoughts entirely. The exercises in the Train Your Nervous System online course is designed to induce a sense of safety rather than a form of escape, and the movements themselves recover the visceral connection that you have with your own body. It's important to understand that the exercises are not a practice, but a stepping stone to clear the brain fog so that you can go beyond the recursive thought patterns. And it's also important to note that once the nervous system is trained, there is no need for these exercises anymore, and they can simply be discarded. Like the finger pointing to the moon, there is no need to linger on the finger once you see what it's pointing towards. So if you're enjoying this video, hit like and subscribe, and join me in the next video in the series as we dive deeper under the hood and explore the nuances of brain architecture and how this shapes the internal dialogue, the actions and outcomes that we see in our lives.